of you to the Autism. Good afternoon. I want to welcome all of you to the Autism Society San Diego's Current Topics in Autism. Today, we are really fortunate to have an expert on the topic of housing and residential placement, and her name is Shelly Gonchoroff. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to her now because she has put together a lot of amazing information for all of you. This is being recorded, and if any of you listening are interested in obtaining the slides from today, please contact our office. We'll share that information with you at the end of today's presentation, and welcome to our meeting. I'll turn it over to Shelly.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. This is such an important topic for many, many families. And I applaud you for learning about what's out there. And the more you know, the better informed you are to make decisions for your loved ones. A little bit about me. I'm a clinical consultant at Optimum Behavioral Health. I am the previous Assistant Director of Residential Services at San Diego Regional Center. I am also a ARF administrator, so that's an adult residential facility, and a registered behavior technician. So lots of experience in the residential world. And most importantly, I learned from every single position that I've had and what families are really looking to hear. And I want to say that this presentation certainly won't answer all of your questions, but at least it'll give you a foundation of where to start and where you can find out more information. So the learning objectives today are to identify the different types of out-of-home residential options available for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, not just autism. Understand how these options intersect with person-centered planning and long-term goals. And to instill confidence in accessing information, asking questions, and advocating for the needs of your loved ones. And my goal is that you walk away knowing a little bit more than you came in here with, and you feel more empowered, and you have a good starting point of where to focus your energy on if this is something that you're working on right now. So I want to invite everybody to consider these things as we go through the presentation. What do you see when you walk into your house? How does it make you feel? What are the things that are important to you in your house? What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel taken care of? And who do you share it with? Who are the people that matter to you? And more importantly, who are the people that you can trust? Because these are the same things that are important to everybody, whether they have a disability or not. For every person here, the word home is going to mean different things. For some people, it may be living at home with their family members forever because that's all they know. But to think outside of the box and to create spaces where people feel safe and they belong and they're treated with dignity. Understanding residential options is only going to make you more informed when the time comes, if the time comes, to consider this option. So why is this important? Future planning, right? You can never start early enough knowing what's out there. To build the quality of life for your loved ones. You know, sometimes it can feel a little gloom and doom out there. Oof, that's okay. But residential options don't have to take away independence. People don't have to have a diminished quality of life. So the more that you know about regulations and processes, the more that you can advocate for what is important to your loved one. Reduce crisis. Many placements happen from a place of crisis because parents or caregivers are at their wits' end, and it's a dangerous situation for people. The hope is that if you at least know what's out there, you can be proactive and make some different strategies or some different plans before you get to the point of crisis. And understand the process. It can be very confusing. There's lots of people involved. You know, regional center, DDS, they love some acronyms. They talk a different language sometimes. And so for families, that can be overwhelming. This is a snapshot of what it looks like. And just a caveat, I do not speak on behalf of the regional center. This information is based on my experience and what DDS implements statewide. Okay, what to expect when considering out-of-home placement. Not every service coordinator knows the ins and outs of residential placement. That's not to say, that's not a disparaging comment at all. The regional center is broken out into different units: adult in-home, early start, residential, and children. And so people that may work in children's services may not know the ins and outs of residential services. So it's important when you're working with your service coordinator to make sure that you're asking for information directly from residential services, or at least getting clarification to make sure that the information that you have is the most accurate and up to date. There's no emergency placements. San Diego Regional Center does not have homes waiting for people to move in if there's a crisis. That that's a myth, unfortunately. If somebody ends up in the hospital and they have to be, discharged that day, Regional Center may not have a bed available. However, they do vendor homes constantly. So new homes are always sprouting up and there may be some vacancies. However, you must consider if these are new homes, are they trained? Do they have a good success rate? So emergency placements, that's not a thing with the regional center, unfortunately. Hopefully in time, DDS, continues to build more crisis resources, but for right now, there's no emergency placements. Regional centers cannot force a provider to accept somebody. So what that means for families is, let's say a family knows a residential provider, they have a relationship with them, maybe a friend and their child have gone through that home. It's up to the residential service provider if they choose to accept a referral. Regional center cannot make them. And that can be frustrating for families, rightfully so, especially if they have, a previous relationship. That is important for families to know because it can be frustrating when the service coordinators say, no, that referral wasn't accepted at this time. It's necessary to follow the process to ensure that all the documentation is in place. There's a whole lot of paperwork that goes into this. There's a whole lot of paperwork in your lives, I'm sure, through IPPs or ISPs, what have you. But specific for residential services, there's admission agreements, there's licensing forms that residential providers need to be responsible for. And if one document is missed, it could create a ripple effect down the line. You might not know how important that paper is when somebody moves in, but it might be important down the line. There's financial expectations when utilizing out-of-home options. There is a cost to it. Regional center does pay the majority of it, but the board and care rate is the responsibility of the individual. And we'll get into that later on in the slides. I think there was an understanding that regional center pays the whole portion of residential placement, and that's not the case. And unfortunately, families find that out later when they're at a point of crisis, and then it becomes a financial strain. This is important. Commitment to the least restrictive setting possible. Homes are responsible for making sure that people can be supported in the less restrictive setting, meaning they can't act out of an abundance of caution just because families feel that that is necessary. That sounds a little harsh. It does. But services are supposed to be data-driven to make sure that people have independence and a quality of life that isn't restricted. And the process starts with the placement referral, the 159A, and the IPP, which we'll go over. So what is the placement referral? The regional center internal document is called the 159A, and this is consistent up and down the state. So if you move to a different area within, California and you're considering placement, it's still called the 159A. The 159A is supposed to be as comprehensive as possible to reflect the needs and the desires and all the important information about your loved one. Regional center is liable for this information when they share it with homes. So if certain things are left out, let's say somebody had a incident of fire starting as a child, that might not seem important, but it is important because regional center is liable for the information that they share with providers. The 159A should be developed with you because it's important that providers are seeing what it's important to the person and important to the family. Yes, you may have a history or there was an incident of fire starting, but what growth, what great things have happened since then? That should also be included in the referral. The 159A can also be used for different services. So crisis services like START, for example, they use a 159A. So if regional center recommends that you do a 159A, don't assume that it's only for placement, but you guys can also have that, on hold if you feel like you're going to need that for potentially a crisis service. Best practice is that 159As are updated at least every 3 months if somebody is looking for placement, because information from a year ago isn't going to do much. But you have to prompt and advocate for that. Or if there's any significant changes, maybe there's a new medical diagnosis or a new service. Let's say they started a new day program or they aged out of school, the 159As should be updated. As parents and caregivers, I strongly recommend that you look at the dates of the 159A. Human error happens at the regional center too. They could be sending a outdated one, but you should definitely be making sure that the information being shared out there is accurate and reflective of the way that you want it. So these are the responsibilities of a licensed residential provider. Basic care and supervision, so clean linens, functioning bathrooms, heating, cooling, furniture, sleeping space. Regulations are very, very specific from CCL. You have to have extra sheets available. So when we say this, it is absolutely black and white. Nutritious meals, 3 meals a day, snacks, special diets need to be accommodated with doctor's orders. So that's very important. If somebody has a food preference, the home may only be able to do so much. But if it's written as a doctor's order of, they cannot have dairy, they cannot have gluten. Oh, perfect. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So doctor's orders are very, very important. And that goes with diet and medications, which we'll get to later on. Personal hygiene support, laundry facilities, clothing, storage. This is all the responsibility of the residential provider. Supervision, so 24/7, and sufficient supervision based off of the needs of the person. If the person requires more direct care and it's written into the IPP, then it's the residential provider's responsibility. They can't say, sorry, we don't have staff. That is out of compliance. That is your right to be served what is written in the IPP and what you agreed upon at the time of admission. Medication management and health monitoring. The residential facilities steps up to assume the doctor's appointments, the pharmacy, all these things. That does not mean that the family is not involved. Families can still go to doctor's appointments. Families can still schedule doctor's appointments if they want, but it is the responsibility of the facility to make sure that somebody is getting the care and preventative care as well. So physicals, immunizations if needed, that is their responsibility. Upholding personal rights, so privacy, dignity, freedom from abuse, handling personal money, visitors, phone use. We're going to talk about HCBS, the final rule, and that speaks to that later on in the presentation. Access to a grievance procedure. People need to know how to speak up and how to do it confidently and comfortably. And this is something that needs to be reviewed with the residents every year. And they have to sign off that they know the process, that they know who to speak to if they're not happy. Protection of personal property, freedom of religion, self-identity, and cultural expression, and implementation of the IPP and the ISP. So whatever is written into the IPP, that's essentially a receipt of services of what the residential provider is responsible for doing. So if something's not documented in the IPP, that can cause problems because the service provider has to follow what is written in the IPP. So as families, it's really important to advocate for an addendum to an IPP if needed, because that protects your loved one, but also the residential provider is able to make the necessary accommodations. Safety and compliance, disaster preparedness, infection control, fire clearance, regulatory compliance, all the responsibility of the residential provider. Residential providers learned a lot through COVID. That changed quite a few things in terms of infection control and what to do if there's an outbreak. So things are a little bit different, not drastically, but there's just more reporting that goes on. So these are the three different types of congregate living options: community care licensing, which we refer to as CCL. So they follow Title 22, and these homes are funded by the regional center, and they operate through the Department of Social Services. Then we have intermediate care facilities, which are funded by the Department of Public Health and managed care plans. So these are not funded by the regional center. And these still are responsible for following Title 22, but not Title 17, which we'll get into in a little bit. Adult family home agencies, these are essentially foster type homes, mentor type homes. So residents are living with families in the family home, and it's different than a group home or an adult residential home because there's a max of only 2 residents that can live in the home. So they become part of the family, essentially. They're not licensed, but they are certified by family home agencies. So they do have curriculum, training requirements, regulations that they follow as part of their agency. So community care licensing has different levels. And recently with rate reform this past year, San Diego Regional Center has changed the different levels of homes. So this presentation reflects the change since rate reform. So adult residential facilities, they have level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, and level 6. This can be very confusing if you have a loved one who's considered a certain level because it may not match up with the level of a home. So just keep that in mind as we go through. Group homes are what we call, it's different than residential facilities. Group homes are for children. And these are also community care licensed homes. And then there's also specialized residential facilities. These are designed specifically for very complex individuals that have high medical or behavioral needs as step-down facilities from locked facilities, from hospital or crisis homes, something like that. There's specific criteria that residents have to meet in order to be eligible for an EBSH or a CCH, which we'll get into. This can be frustrating for families, and Regional Center and DDS recognize this. I want to just step back a little bit and give some context. These specialized residential facilities were designed as a result of the developmental centers closing in 2018. DDS decided people need to be served in the community. They don't need to be served in institutions. So that's what prompted the development of these homes. However, development of these homes take a really long time. So the need far exceeds the resources available. And again, that's frustrating to families. It's frustrating to Regional Center as well. But DDS is providing more and more funding and requests for proposals for continued development of EBSHs and CCHs. So these are the basic levels of care of CCL facilities. So level 2 is basic staffing and supervision, limited behavioral or medical needs. These are really designed for people that are fairly independent. Maybe they can take transportation by themselves. They don't need constant supervision. Maybe they just don't want to live with mom and dad anymore. This would be more of a level 2. A level 3 is they do have to have consultation hours. It doesn't have to be through a behavioral consultant or like a BCBA. It could be like a music therapist, something like that. And this is part of rate reform. And as the levels get higher, the staffing hours increase. Level 4, additional staffing hours and required trainings, fire support, and behavioral needs. Level 4 and 5 are more focused on the medical needs. So people that require like injections or restricted healthcare plans, this is really where they kind of fall under. Level 6 is the previous level 4I, if anybody's familiar with that. And this is the highest level of home before you get into the specialized homes. So it's designed for people with severe behavioral needs, very high levels of support, and they must have awake overnight staff. Actually, in a level 3, they have to have awake overnight staff as well, unless it's written into the IPP that individuals do not need support overnight. So again, it goes back to what is written into the IPP because that's a contract for the residential provider. And then level 7, these are specialized facilities with extreme support needs, custom staffing and service structure, individual budgets, and eligibility criteria. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more to explain what that means. Group homes for children. So they range dependent on the program design of the facility. So a group home could be for ages 7 to 17, but the rule of thumb is that there can't be more of a 5-year age difference between residents. So if a 7-year-old is there, you can't have a 17-year-old in the home because that exceeds a 5-year difference. So it really depends kind of on the first resident that moves in to set the tone of what the age range is going to be for that house. Some providers narrow it down and they say we're only going to work with kids from age 7 to 12 or 12 to 17. It just depends on what the program design is written for that facility. So they must receive an age exemption from CCL to stay over the age of 18, and regional center must support this request. So what this means in simple terms is if somebody is in a transition age program, and that goes until 22. Some families don't want to move the person because they've been so successful in their group home. With a age exemption, which is granted from community care licensing, they can stay, but it depends on the percentage in the home. You can't have 2 people over the age of 18 in the home, but you could potentially have 1. But it's very individually based and regional center needs to agree on it. In all reality, having an adult living in a group home, it's a liability for all parties. Let's say that the 18-year-old gets into an altercation with a 12-year-old, then they can be charged as an adult. So it's really, really not recommended and it's not safe. There's a prudent parenting. Yes.
Question, so if they go over 18, does that also narrow that 5-year gap? Like, like they're 20, 27.
It changes everything within the home. Yeah. The prudent parenting standard is specific to group homes, and that's essentially, it's a regulation where staff have to they have to consider what they would offer or how they would treat their own children in terms of like going to after school activities or celebrating birthdays, things like this. Just because they're paid staff doesn't mean that they have to be, they can't have that empathy, they can't have that rapport. So the prudent parenting standard is a training all group home administrators and staff need to go to really make sure that the children have that parenting, not necessarily parenting, but just have that rapport with the staff. And again, the staff don't replace the parents. The parents should be involved. They should work with the residential staff. Nobody is trying to replace the loved ones. And then it's shared resources with the county. So most group homes tend to be shared resources with the county, like small family homes where they place foster children as well. Not every group home is, but that typically is an option for most group homes. So this is more about specialized residential facilities, enhanced behavior support homes. We call them EBSHs. So they're a higher staff to resident ratio, and the residents have to have individual behavior support plans and emergency intervention plans, which are constantly reviewed with the regional center, with the family, and with DDS on a consistent basis. So once you get to the level of living in a specialized residential facility, the monitoring it goes from 0 to 60. You have lots of people involved in your loved one's care, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a little bit of a circus having to wrangle everybody together. That's not the responsibility of the family. That's the responsibility of the residential provider to manage that circus and to schedule accordingly. But the IBSP and the emergency intervention plans, those have to constantly be reviewed to assess what is working and what is not working. And as a result of those plans may mean increased staffing ratios, or it could mean, facilitating more extracurricular activities so they can get out of the house more. There's lots more there's a lot more expectations in an ABSH, we'll say. It's a statewide resource as well. So ABSHs here in San Diego, they can accept referrals from anywhere in the state. So just because somebody lives here in San Diego, that doesn't mean that they're a shoe-in for a vacancy with an ABSH. It's based off of need. And again, that can be frustrating as well. But what that also means is that people in San Diego are also open to other ABSHs up and down the state. And the interdisciplinary teams meet quarterly or as needed. So you have a lot of meetings when somebody lives in an ABSH. You review the IBSP, the emergency intervention plan, and then quarterly you review the individual service plan. Most providers tend to try to consolidate those meetings because it's not fun for the resident to participate in those meetings, and the resident should be in meetings about them, right? So most providers, they try to work with people to try to maximize time. The goal of the EBSH is to support stabilization, skill development, and community integration in the least restricted environment as possible. ABSHs are not they're not designed to be forever homes. That was something that back in 2018, when people were transitioning into the community, that was kind of the tagline that DDS said to families to try to get them to understand why people were moving from the developmental facility. I don't think anybody anticipated that was going to be taken literally, but now in retrospect, people had assumptions that their loved one was going to stay in this home forever. But because these are specialized resources, if somebody doesn't need that level of care, then it's recommended that they transition to lower levels of care, like a level 6, because somebody who really needs an EBSH, we have to really maximize those resources. I will say I know people that have lived in EBSHs for 8 years and they're not planning on moving, and that's okay too. But it's an option for people if they have gained enough adaptive skills and coping skills and they want to live independently, that it is an option for them to step down. Most EBSHs have a delayed egress, which is outside of the perimeter. Some even have a secured perimeter. It's important that families understand what that means. This is important for individuals who have tendency to elope or to AWOL, but it can also be restrictive for somebody who doesn't need that level of care, right? And so just knowing that that is part of an EBSH model is very valuable for families. Okay. So this is a criteria for being eligible for enhanced behavior support home. So displays challenging behaviors that pose a safety risk to self or others, property destruction, law enforcement involvement, or frequent crisis service use. Needs cannot be met safely in a lower level residential setting. They have to have a comprehensive functional assessment completed by a licensed clinician. It can't just be a service coordinator. It has to be a licensed clinician. And the case is reviewed by an internal team within the regional center to determine eligibility. An IPP must indicate that this person requires this level of care. A couple of things I want to point out here. Needs cannot be safely met in a lower level of care. So people have to have the chance to try to be successful in a lower level of care. And that can be really frustrating for families when families know that their loved one really needs to be somewhere with a delayed egress. But that's how the system is built right now, unfortunately. You kind of have to try things to know what doesn't work in order to get eligible for the point of this level of care. Hopefully that's something that once there's more EBSHs and CCHs, that's reconsidered. But due to the scarcity of resources, that's how it's developed now. So this is a community crisis home, very similar to an enhanced behavior support home. The difference is that a community care license home is time limited. It's not meant to exceed more than 12 months. On some occasions, DDS may extend it to 18 months, but I've never seen it go above then, and it's really not recommended. These are enhanced staffing ratios. They have multiple consultants, clinical, behavioral, speech, PT, OT. And the EBSH and the CCHs are funded through individual budgets. which is different than the other homes, which are purchased as a service, regional centers paying for this. Individual budgets are considered for people, it's necessary rather, for people in this level of care home because there's so many extra costs that go into it. There's so many other consultants and people involved in their care. And the goal of the CCH is to stabilize someone to be able to transition to an EVSH or even to transition to a level 6. The priority goes to people stepping down from locked settings. So there are still some locked settings here in California, like hospitals, for example. There are some DDS crisis safety net programs, and the priority goes to stepping those individuals down as opposed to somebody who needs it and hasn't tried a lower level of care. That can be controversial. It can be, but again, that's how the system is designed right now. And a welfare and institutions code 6500, this is necessary for somebody to live in a CCH. This is essentially a court order that determines that an individual is a danger to themselves or danger to others. And you have to renew the 6500 every 6 months. So the reason why the functional or the comprehensive assessment has to be completed by a licensed clinician is because if somebody contests the 6500, a licensed clinician has to go in front of the judge to explain why the recommendation for this level of care is there. That's why it can't just be a service coordinator. It has to be somebody with those credentials. And as opposed to meeting quarterly, they meet weekly. So even more meetings happen in the CCHs. Go ahead. So this is a criteria for CCH, very similar to the enhanced behavioral support homes. So somebody poses an intimate risk to harm herself to others. Person has repeated hospitalizations, law enforcement involvement, and failed placements. It's impossible to return to current home due to safety. Intensity and frequency of behaviors is too intense for less restrictive settings. And it's reviewed by the internal committee within the regional center and DDS, and it's a time-limited placement. All the staff that work in enhanced behavior support homes and community crisis homes at minimum have to be registered behavior technicians with experience. So the level of care and the level of supervision and support in these homes is quite different than what you're going to get in a level 6. There's also what they call an IRF cushion. Say that sometimes fast. The ARC cushion is an adult residential facility for persons with special healthcare needs. So people living in the developmental center in 2018, some of them had complex medical needs, but they couldn't step down to an enhanced behavioral support home because they needed 24-hour nursing care. And if you require 24-hour nursing care, you can't live in a community care licensed facility. So they developed ARF cushions, and these are designed for people who are medically fragile and require daily nursing care and monitoring. So you can see the examples: ventilators, trachs. It's very intensive with medical oversight. They have to have an on-site LVN and an RN, and they have to coordinate with all the specialists and the doctors. And the homes themselves are designed to be kind of little mini hospitals to meet their needs. Some ARF cushions have a behavioral component. They call that an ARF cushion B. But in reality, somebody that has high behavior needs that could aggress towards someone else, it's probably not great for them to be around medically fragile people because that's a risk to everybody. So the ARF cushion B's, behavior really has to be considered of what's going to work in the home. And there's also a group cushion, which is the children's version of an ARF cushion. And the goal of these homes is to support residents in the community as opposed to hospitals, nursing facilities, or institutions. So this is a criteria for an ARF cushion. Health needs exceed the training of staff in an ARF. Required LVN and RN on site daily to provide medical interventions. Can safely live in a community home as opposed to skilled nursing or hospital. They must be referred by the regional center and approved by DDS. And a comprehensive health assessment must be conducted and reviewed by the internal regional center team. And the home must develop an individual healthcare plan along with an ISP. The SDRC nurses or the regional center nurses and DDS nurses are highly, highly involved with these individuals because they want to make sure that nothing is being overlooked and that medical needs are being supported in the community. The intermediate care facilities. There's 3 different types of intermediate care facilities, the ICF, DD. So these are for people who require 24-hour personal care, supervision, health services, and habilitation training. The focus of these programs is really to develop self-help, socialization, and adaptive skills. Now, because ICFs are funded by managed care plans, typically these facilities are for individuals who don't have high behavior, but maybe they have like more medical needs. The reason why they're not designed for high behavior individuals is because regional center can't always push in support to a facility that they're not funding, right? They can't push in a supplemental staffing person because Department of Public Health and Insurance is funding this. I have yet to see a case where managed care plans fund supplemental staffing, but who knows, maybe in the future. ICF-DDHs are for people who need continuous training and habilitation with intermittent nursing care. So these are people with a little bit more intensive medical needs. And the focus is on independent living skills, self-care, vocational training, and social skills. And then we have an ICF-DDN, and these are for people who need 24-hour nursing supervision due to significant medical needs. And the focus is on nursing care and training and daily living activities where possible. So again, ICFs are really not designed for people with high behavioral needs because of that barrier with the supplemental support, but they are very good for, individuals who maybe have a restricted healthcare plan, like they need insulin or, something like that. This could be a very appropriate resource for them. Adult family home agencies. These are the family home providers. They are recruited and trained and certified by the AFHA agency. And what's great about this program is it's designed to be a matching program. So, because again, somebody's moving into a family home and it could be an intergenerational home. There could be grandparents, there could be children. So a good fit is really important. Most family home agencies, if they get a referral for somebody who wants to live in an AFHA, let's say, their religion and culture is very, very important to them, right? That's part of who they are. And there's no AFHA providers currently that meet their needs. They can try to recruit somebody, so maybe it takes a little bit longer. The AFHA process is a little bit longer because of that matching process. So it's not designed for people with significant behavioral or medical needs. The reason being, if somebody has significant property destruction, most families are going to be really hesitant about that because they, don't want their home destroyed. However, I do know that AFHA DVS is really, really pushing for the expansion of the AFHA program because it's so individualized and person-centered. So there are different tiers and levels of care, and they are starting to try to create programs and homes for people that have more complex needs at higher compensation to try to recruit families. So again, this is something that could change over time because it really is a very individualized option for somebody. Go ahead. So home and community-based services. This is otherwise known as the final rule, and it's issued by Center for Medicaid Services, CMS, in March 2014. The deadline was supposed to be 2020, but what were you guys all doing in March 2020? Probably not this. So the deadline was extended to March 2023, and all residential providers had to go through an extensive process with Regional Center to make sure that their programs were in compliance with HCBS. The core requirements: community integration, choice and autonomy, privacy, dignity and rights, control of resources, and individualized services. We look at this and we think, well, shouldn't this have always been in place? And the answer is yes. But what the final rule did is, how are you going to show that? What evidence do you have? Because now a lot of regional center, they are on performance contracts with DDS. There's a lot more push for data-driven outcomes. And so HCBS really requires providers to have evidence of how they're implementing them. There can be modifications. So let's say, for example, somebody wakes up in the middle of the night and they want to eat their whole fridge, right? And it's a safety issue. They have diabetes, it can be a real problem. The service coordinator can work with the family and the HCBS team within the regional center to create a modification for that person. As long as it's documented in the IPP, changes can be made. You have to advocate for that and just make sure that the documentation is in place. It's very important to understand that residential providers, this is new to them in the sense that there's a lot more accountability out there. There's a lot more monitoring, and HCBS compliance is tied to money. And if providers are not compliant with HCBS, it affects the money that they're receiving. So a lot of providers are really scared to make modifications. They shouldn't be scared. You just have to go through the proper channels, which Regional Center has a fabulous HCBS team to help providers do that. And it's important that planning teams meet regularly. And part of HCBS is really hearing from the person. Is this working for you? Do you like it? Do you want to change it? And showing evidence of it and really making sure that their voices are heard. That's the promise. And that really is HCBS in a nutshell. So these are the financial responsibilities tied to out-of-home congregate living. So room and board, it's determined by the state of California. It's not determined by the regional center. These are your SSI benefits, right? And the representative payee is responsible for paying these. The amount goes up every year, but this is what it is currently. And then this also includes P&I, so personal and incidental. So if they want to go out and buy things on their own, that's where the money comes from. What is nice is when somebody moves into residential placement, let's say that they don't have SSI set up yet. The residential provider or the family can take the admission agreement to the SSI office and they will retro from the date of admission. So that way everybody, it's paid for. Now, SSI can take a while, so there's always that. So it does need to be discussed with the residential provider ahead of time to make sure that they know the SSI is going to be taken care of. There's the medical costs. So providers are responsible for taking people, to their medical appointments and making sure that they have their medications and things like that. But copays are still the responsibility of the representative payee or the individual. The room and board is paid directly to the facility, and families do have the option of using a third-party payee, like an FMS provider, to do that. But Regional Center doesn't get involved in the board and care portion between an individual and the residential facility. They pay the bulk of it, but the SSI portion that's the responsibility of the individual or the family. And Regional Center will only pay the room and board portion under very, very special circumstances. Now, it's important to recognize that this is a change within the last 5 years. It used to be that if somebody was going to live in residential placement, that SDRC was their authorized representative payee because that way it ensured that providers were getting that board and care portion. But in retrospect, Regional Center realized we shouldn't be working with people's monies. We shouldn't be authorized payees. So they made the change a few years back to work with a third-party FMS agency if somebody doesn't have an authorized representative, which is really reflective of HCBS and person-centered. All homes, all residential homes are monitored, and there's lots and lots of oversight that goes into these homes. So community care licensing and the Department of Public Health, there's pre-licensing inspections, annual and announced inspections, complaint investigations, and they're responsible for issuing citations or penalties. They come out all the time, and they are responsible for following up on any concern that comes up. They have to. Now, if they come out on a timely manner, that's one thing, but they will come out there dependent on the situation. Then there's also the regional center. So same thing, pre-vendorization inspection, quarterly visits to the home, unannounced inspections, quality assurance audits, and HCBS audits. This is new for residential providers. Regional Center really, really picked up the monitoring and the oversight in these homes, which is a great thing because it only uplifts the quality of care in these homes. DVS monitors the specialized residential facilities. So they go out to the home with their own team quarterly or monthly to visit the home. They do their own unannounced inspections and quality assurance audits. Fire authority, you have to have a safety clearance in all these homes. City and county, you have to make sure that everything's good with zoning and building permits. And then there's also rights agencies, the Office of Clients' Rights. So if somebody feels like their rights are being impeded on, they can call OCRA and OCRA can get involved. So hopefully this gives people a little bit of peace of mind that when you go, you make that decision for your loved one to go into a congregate living, there's so many eyes in you. There really is. Now, does that mean that everything's going to be perfect? No, but you're going to know that at least the health and the safety and the foundation is there, and everything else can be worked out through communication, planning, team meetings, and collaboration. So how you can stay informed. So CCL eHome that is licensed through community care licensing. There is a public CDSS facility search. So any unannounced visits, any citations, anything, it's all made public on there. So you can search that as public record. DPS puts out reports on compliance updates, regional center board meetings. They also report on their services as part of performance contracts. It's probably not going to be as detailed as you would like it to be, but it will be, an overall snapshot. The CCL reports are pretty detailed. OCRA, they provide public education and family support, similar to what the Autism Society here is doing. They can help with training and expectations, all sorts of different things. Also, too, the Exceptional Family Resource Center has family navigators that connect with families to kind of talk parent to parent on what residential looks like. And that's a really valuable resource as well. And then inspection reports for the Department of Public Health, for the ICFs, those are also public. So in a nutshell, this is the flow of a residential placement. So you complete the placement referral with the service coordinator, the 159A. And again, you don't have to wait until you're in crisis to do that. You can do that proactively. The service coordinator circulates that among appropriate and available resources. This is important because referrals should only be sent to appropriate resources. A child's referral should not be sent to an adult residential facility, right? So it's important that the service coordinators are really scrutinizing it, and then they're only sending it to homes that have availability, right? That they only have vacancies. The service coordinator schedules a meet and greet at the residential facility for the individual and family. Strongly encourage for families to be part of that. Absolutely. So should the service coordinator if they're available, because that's a great time to answer questions, go over expectations, and really familiarize yourself with the environment. You can also request additional visits for meet and greets. Let's say you're not quite sold on this home yet. It's within your right to ask for another meet and greet. Some homes may say yes, some might say no because of scheduling, but that's something that you can work out with the service coordinator. The residential facility reviews collateral and conducts assessment to determine needs and services. Homes are responsible, talking about the documentation, for doing functional capabilities assessments, needs and services plans before somebody is accepted into the home to make sure that the home is designed to meet their needs. If they can't meet their needs, they shouldn't be accepting them. So it's very, very important. And there's a lot of paperwork that goes into even before somebody's accepted into the home. The admission date is identified. At that point, you're going to want to make sure the SSI is in place, or at least you have a plan. Like somebody's going to apply for SSI as soon as they move in, or the authorized representative payee is identified, because that information really needs to be ironed out before the admission. The service coordinator works with the family on developing a transition plan that includes all current and future services. So, for example, if somebody's in a day program up in North County and they're considering a home and a home, that could be really problematic. They're going to be in the car for 2 hours a day, potentially. That might not be the best fit. So really figuring out, okay, well, what services are available in alcohol? How can we work on this transition? There should never be a lapse in services. And that's up to the regional center to work out. It can be hard because day programs have a lot of wait lists, but that is the responsibility of the regional center to help you coordinate. If the meeting happens and all the documentation is signed and expectations are clear on all ends, the resident really needs to be part of that admission meeting if they can. it's important that they are part of every single part of this process because, again, we talk about what home means to us. This is going to be their home for a little bit. You want them to feel welcomed and invested. And then after somebody moves in, you have a planning team meeting after 30 days. And this is with everybody. Is it working? Is it not working? What can we change? Maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe it's not. Then it would be determined there. Or maybe it's a great fit. And at that point, if it is a great fit, the service coordinator that you were previously working with, it's going to change to a residential service coordinator because the residential service coordinator then assumes all the individuals in the home and that's part of their caseload because the residential service coordinator supports the home to make sure they're in compliance with all the regulation and then they become the service coordinator for all the residents. And that's for a few reasons, mostly to be efficient with time, to make sure, they can get eyes on the individuals. But that can be hard for families, especially if they've worked with the same service coordinator for 10, 15 years. So if that's the case, I strongly encourage you to talk to your service coordinator now about what that transition may look like at that time, because they can do a warm handoff. You just have to advocate for it. And planning team meeting is scheduled quarterly, and that's when the ISP, IPP, and transition goals are reviewed. Transition goals are important because if somebody's moving into a level 6, maybe they're always going to need a level 6. It's possible. But goals should be written to encourage people to build their capacity in the hopes that someday they can step down to a lower level of care. Maybe they won't, but who are we to say that? Who are we to stop trying, right? And so ISP should include transition goals. And it could be, somebody wants to live independent or somebody wants to work on hygiene and remembering to shower every day in hopes that they can live independently someday. It doesn't have to be something huge and dramatic, but something that increases their independence moving forward. So these are the roles of the service coordinator: provide information and options, ensure that people understand their rights, funding, and expectations. So really walking you through the SSI stuff. Assessment of needs to determine the right level of care, document support needs, risks, and goals, ensure the person's voice, choice, and preference drive the decisions, arrange tours and interviews and refer to appropriate resources, complete the necessary paperwork, make sure that the placement is appropriate, not just available, authorize funding, coordinate services and transportation, create a transition plan that supports the person and the family, ongoing monitoring of goals, specifically transition goals, monitor compliance with regulations, HCBS and person-centered practices, review all reports and special incident reports. This is an important one. The service coordinator should know what is going on in the home and intervene and call an IDC meeting if needed. If somebody is having 10 special incident reports in a month, something needs to be talked about. Something needs to be worked out, right? So it's very, very important that the service coordinator is aware of what's going on at home. They need to remain responsive to communication and they need to mitigate risk. And what that means is in a residential home is maybe somebody has a community access plan. They live in a level 6 facility, but maybe church is very important to them, that they go to church every Sunday. They have a built-in community and that's very, very important to them. The home and the service coordinator and the family and the individual can work on a community access plan to help that person be independent at church. Maybe, they find a mentor type person at church who can kind of be there to support them there. They have their cell phone that's programmed with the administrator's number, just steps to make sure that things are strategic and proactive to mitigate risk. Independent living services. So this is not congregate living. This is still out of home options. Independent living services are designed to support people to live in their own homes. Individuals pay for their own rent, groceries, and utilities. If eligible, Section 8 vouchers or rental assistance provided by the regional center. Both of those can be hard to come by, just fair warning, but they are available. Designed for adults who do not require 24-hour supervision, but do need help maintaining daily living skills. So maybe they need help with medication management or budgeting or just overall hygiene and acts of daily. An adolescent instructor comes to the home, maybe usually a few hours a week, and works on cooking, meal planning, all these different options, again, based off of what is written into the IPP and what they decide is important together for the individual. And independent living is flexible, short-term or ongoing support. It's not something necessarily that needs to be faded out. There's plenty of individuals who've lived independently for years with ILS support, and it works for them. There's some people who try it and it's not their fit, and then they go back to congregate living. But again, it's about supporting people in the less restrictive environment as possible. So the goal is to maximize independence, self-determination, and quality of life in the least restrictive setting. Now we have supported living services. So these are funded supports to help individuals live in their own homes instead of a group home. And they're designed for people that want to live independently, but require more help with daily living. So a little bit more support is needed than independent living, but maybe they don't want to live with a whole bunch of roommates. That's not their jam. They want to live independently, and this is a great opportunity for them to do so. The person chooses their own place, and they hold the lease, not the provider. Staff provide support in the same way as ILS, but less hours. SLS can be 24/7 if necessary. It can also be doubled. Depending on if somebody has high behavioral needs, it could be that they have two staff 24/7. It all depends on that assessment when you're talking and you're planning and really identifying what that person needs to maintain their safety. To utilize supported living services, you have to go through an orientation at the regional center to understand the process and really the expectations. They were offering it twice a year, but now I believe that they're offering it more because more and more providers are coming. So I think that if you ask your service coordinator, they can facilitate a pretty quick orientation. So the difference between ILS and SLS, ILS is teaching programs, teaching skills to learn life skills, and SLS is to support somebody to live independently with as much support as they need. So how do we prepare for out-of-home options? Talk to your service coordinator before residential placement or out-of-home is even considered. Have a conversation. You could do that at your annual meeting. You could do that at your IPP meeting. But as long as they know that this might be something coming down the pipeline, they can give you resources. They can give you information on training such as this or information meetings. They can really help you be proactive if you talk to them. Review the IPP closely that needs and supports are accurately described. So if you are considering out-of-home options, really scrutinize the 159A and IPP to make sure it really reflects your loved one. Because sometimes, especially when there's different service coordinators over the years, some things can get lost in translation, some things can be outdated. Just make sure that that information really is what you want providers to see. Track your communication with the regional center. I highly recommend this again, just because the service coordinator that you're working with right now might not be the service coordinator that you work with when they move into residential. Or, it could take a while to circulate the referral and you want to make sure that they're staying on top of it. It's just best practice to make sure that you're tracking. So that way, if you need to escalate it a little bit higher, you have the data to do so. Ask clarifying questions and consider out-of-home respite as a trial. So out-of-home respite is available for individuals. Regional center will pay up to 21 days per year in out-of-home respite. They won't go over 21 days. The reason being is that if it goes over 21 days, then the cost that they're paying is more than what they would be paying for a residential placement. But you can break up those days. You could try it, 3 days, 1 month, and then 2 days the next month. Or maybe parents are planning a vacation and that's very important. And then they can schedule that in advance. Not all residential providers offer out-of-home respite. They have to be specifically vendored for that. So that's something that you need to make sure that you're talking to your service coordinator about. Collect and organize medical information, behavior reports, educational records. The more information that you can share with residential providers, the better your collaboration is going to be. They want to know all the things, even the historical stuff, because they want to work with you to best support your loved one if you leave them in the dark, it can be hard, right? And there's some families who maybe it's hard for them to share things because they had trauma in the past. Just talk to the service coordinator about it because the service coordinator can help bridge them for you. SSI needs to be in place at the time of admission, or a plan needs to be in place with adequate documentation. So if you're even considering, moving forward with out-of-home options, think about what that looks like for SSI for your family. If, parents want to be authorized representative, or maybe the individual can be their own authorized representative, or if you want to use a third-party payee. And talk with other families with lived experiences and visit homes. The Parent Navigation Program, or the Family Navigator Program through Exceptional Family Resource Center, is fantastic. The helpline through the Autism Society is another resource that's available. There's lots of families out there that want to connect with families who are new to the process. I hear that all the time. Please, please share my information. I want to help this family get through it. I want them to know what we went through and what I would have done differently. There's lots and lots of hope and support and help out there. So common things, questions. This is not an exhaustive list, but they were the ones that I could think of at the time. Can people receive services through self-determination and live in a residential home? Yes, they can. The only difference is that they can't live in an EBSH or a CCH. That's different because of the individual budgets, but they can live in lower levels of care. The caveat here is that the residential provider needs to agree to it. And again, regional center can't force a provider to do anything. But because it's a little bit different with self-determination, sometimes people are a little bit hesitant on what that looks like. But it is doable. There are people living in a residential right now who are on self-determination. So it's important to recognize too that self-determination, it's not new, but it's relatively new in the world of residential. So I think providers are coming around to it more now that people have tried it and it's not so big and scary. But it's a conversation that needs to be had with the service coordinator. Does my loved one have to be in a day program if they live in a residential facility? No, they don't. That is their choice. Now, historically, that was not the case. Historically, it used to be that if people lived in a residential home, they had to be in day program because it was a staffing issue for the residential program, right? To staff, during the day. But now with HCBS, if somebody doesn't want to go to day program, they don't have to. It's the residential provider's responsibility to provide that 24/7 staffing based on that person's needs. Wait, what if they're still in school? Same thing applies. So school attendance is required by law for ages 6 to 18. But if somebody is in a transition age program and they don't want to go, the provider can't force them to go. What happens if it isn't a good fit? Request a community meeting to discuss concerns proactively. It is well within your right to ask and call for a meeting anytime you need. That is your right. That is their right of them living in the home. This is their home, their services. Regional center is responsible for exploring alternative options. If it isn't a good fit, it can take a while, but the home cannot just kick somebody out. It's not how it works. The home is responsible for supporting an individual to the best of their ability until another home is identified. That is the responsibility of the provider. So they have to issue a 30-day notice. They have to treat the individual like a tenant, right? So tenant rights apply in this situation. But it's important that you don't wait to the point where the individual can't stand living there and the staff can't work with them. You talk to your service coordinator before, because the more time you have to prepare, the more time it gives the service coordinator to find a more suitable option. Can families stay involved? Yes, absolutely. Residential providers love when families stay involved because sometimes, somebody wants to go home for the weekend or somebody wants to spend the holiday with them. Absolutely. Or they want to come and celebrate a holiday at the facility with them. That is all great. Nobody's trying to replace the family at all. But you do have to keep in mind that these are congregate living facilities. So if somebody's sharing a room with somebody and the family's there every Sunday, that could not be great for the roommate. And so house rules and visitation rules, these are all things that you're going to want to talk about and understand prior to the admission. So that way there's clear expectations moving forward. But at the end of the day, these are congregate living facilities. You can't control what your roommate likes, what your roommate doesn't like, and they have the same rights as you. And so that can be complicated, just like it's complicated for any of us to live as roommates, right? So what if a resident wants a house and spend the night in the facility? This happens all the time in adult residential because they're adults just like all of us. It goes back again to the house rules and the expectations. The provider is responsible for making sure that somebody is allowing a visitor to come in willingly, and they're giving their consent to do so, that there's safety and supervision practices in place, again, to mitigate risk. But they can't say, no, you can't have somebody spend the night, but it needs to be a conversation, right? So things like this, the more that residential providers and families can empower their individuals or their loved ones to speak up and do what's important to them, the more that these things are going to work together. Okay. So that's all I have for you today. This is my email and my phone number. Feel free to reach out. The presentation's going to go out.
We have one question online that said, what if they have SSDI, not SSI?
That's something that happens a lot, and they just need to work with the service coordinator to make sure that everything is kosher, because they can still get the SSDI to pay the board and care rate. It just has to be documented accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelly. Hold on a second. Anybody have questions that are here in the room? Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have questions about, my child just happened to be in a children's group home. About community outings, and it sounds like it wouldn't be any kind of a problem to just go take a community outing if ever wanted to. But with the staff there, would they have support that could go with them on that as well?
Absolutely.
just reiterate the question.
So the question is, if somebody is living in a children's facility or even in an adult residential facility, what community outings look like?
Yeah.
So staff are responsible for taking them out into the community where they want to go. An outing to CVS isn't a community outing, that's running an errand. But going to the beach or going to a movie, things like that, staff are absolutely, the residential home is responsible for coordinating activities like that. If family members want to meet up with them in the community, they can do that too. For some people, maybe going out in the community is a little bit harder and they need additional staff. So that could be something that's worked out with the service coordinator too. Or maybe they, aren't on a one-to-one while they're living it, or they're in the home, but when they're out in the community, they need a one-to-one to maintain their safety.
Yeah, because that's what I was wondering. Say I wanted to just take him to the zoo, and would they be able to send somebody?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have two quick questions. Thank you, Shelly. That was fantastic. Amazing information, really needed. On the financials, you mentioned having SSI, and then there was $179 P&I that the family pays.
Mhm.
Can that amount vary based on what the home wants to charge, or is that a fixed amount? So a facility could charge $2,000 potentially.
For STP, yeah.
Okay, so you guys understand my question. She mentioned it's $179 for the caregiver parent to pay out of their portion, but my question is, can the vendor, the residents charge beyond that?
That's a great question.
So the P&I actually comes from the SSI, right? So parents can do more, but community care licensed facilities have a max of how much cash can be in the home because it's a liability. The max is $250 because if a parent sends a check for $1,000, that's a liability.
So, okay, so that thank you for that. And then what about children who are entering in group homes and you still have to have SSI, but they don't qualify for SSI due to family income?
Yeah, that's an important one. So it used to be that DDS had a parent fee, but that has since been waived since COVID. So if families don't qualify for SSI, it's a conversation with a regional center, because a regional center, if somebody is denied by an administrative law judge So they appeal the denial, and a regional center can pay for the board and care portion, but they have to be denied by an administrative law judge. So that means you really got to stay on top of it. Otherwise, it's the family responsibility.
And then this is I'm sorry, last question, then one more. What's the timeline when you've gone through all the application, you're in the queue, your name's on the list, and then an opening comes up? What's the typical timeline for a family or caregiver to say, yes or no, we're going to take that spot? Is that a fixed timeline? I know you can't just sit on it for 2 or 3 months. So maybe just giving people an idea that if you're on the list and your name comes up, what's the timeline that you should be expected to decide if you're going to take it or not?
So it varies, the timeline varies, but keep in mind that if somebody has a vacancy in a facility, they're probably getting at least 5 to 10 referrals. And so it's very important to act quickly, although you shouldn't feel rushed to make that decision. It's a conversation you should have with the service coordinator, and the service coordinator can be real with you on it. And maybe they know something you don't know about, maybe it's not a good fit. But for every vacancy, you can probably assume, I think 5 to 10 is probably a very conservative. It's probably like 10 to 15 referrals. Yeah.
Good. 2 more questions online. Do you have resources for establishing SSI?
I do. I can share them with you. Yep. I can send them to you and we can send it out. It's online. It's just public information. It's not anything special.
Perfect. And then clarify, no matter what type of home the individual lives, it costs the individual or family $1,420.07 out of pocket monthly.
So SSI benefits are supposed to cover that. But if SSI is denied by an administrative law judge, then yes, that is regional center will pick it up. But if it's not denied by an administrative law judge, it's just a denial, then it's the family's responsibility.
Thank you, Shelly.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, Shelly has graciously given her contact information. You may also contact us at the Autism Society. It's info@autismsocietysandiego.org. If you would like a copy of these slides, a copy of the recording, we can make that available to you. So thank you very much for supporting us, and hope to see you next month, where we're going to talk about how to make the healthcare experience more autism friendly by our friends over at Rady's. Thank you.